Well, welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. I think the trickle of people trying to find this room doing the little marathon has ended. Seems like most everyone that's going to be here is going to be here, so why don't we get started? So welcome to the 6th annual ADLM Careers in Industry Luncheon. I'm Nadav Kaufman. I'm the Senior Director of Global Marketing for Clinical Labs Menu and Innovation at Quidel Ortho. And I'm also a member of ADLM's Corporate Advisory Board. And so I'm honored to moderate this panel here today. The Careers in Industry Luncheon is hosted jointly by ADLM's Corporate Advisory Board, the Society for Young Clinical Laboratorians, also known as SYCL, and the CLS Council. This event was developed to provide professional development and networking opportunities to early career professionals. The speakers here today will each briefly share their career paths, expertise, and experiences. Their talks will be followed by a Q&A session, so hold your questions and please think through some really great questions to challenge these folks. I know they'll be excited to answer them. During that Q&A session, you'll definitely have the opportunity to ask more in-depth questions of the speakers about their experiences in industry and compared to working in a lab setting. And after that, we will have about 15 minutes to network directly with the speakers. I'd like to first take this opportunity to thank each of these speakers for being here today. Many of them arrived here in Chicago a day or two early. So I want to thank them very much, and if we could give them a round of applause. I'm super excited about the panel we have here today. We've assembled a panel for you that come from a wide variety of backgrounds and fill a wide variety of roles within the diagnostics industry. So the goal was really to give you a plethora of ideas on how to make the move from the lab directly into industry. So why don't I start just by introducing our speakers. The first one on the far end is Jackie Paulo. Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
Jackie Paulo is the Senior Director of Strategic Marketing at Quidel Ortho. Next, we have Colleen Strain. Colleen takes the win for the longest title on earth. And Colleen Strain, PhD, and Jackie, MBA, by the way. And I think degrees here are important because they're part of our path into industry, right? So Colleen Strain, PhD, she's manager for scientific leadership and education for the core diagnostics medical affairs team at Abbott, and also the scientific lead for the Univance of Healthcare Excellence Program. Welcome, Colleen. Next, we have Phoebe Della Serna, MLT, Customer Relationship Manager at Stago Canada Limited. After Colleen, Kwaku Tewia, PhD, he's scientific partner of the core laboratory team at Roche Diagnostics. And finally, George Worsham, MBA, MTASCP, Senior Global Product Manager for Informatics, also at Quidel Ortho. So thank you all for being here. And why don't we start with Jackie, if you could tell us about your background, how you got here, and what might be interesting for the audience to know.
Sure. How are you guys all doing today? Good? I'm Jackie Paulo, and just to tell you a little bit about my path and my career, I started out, just in case we have any Hokies in here, at Virginia Tech, and I did a bachelor's in biology and human nutrition and food and exercise. And during that time, I got a little bit of experience as a research assistant, working in the lab, creating actin myosin gels, and it was a really good experience. And then I was an EMT on the Virginia Tech Rescue Squad, which was one of the coolest, most life-changing experiences. And my original plan was to go to medical school, but I thought it would take a little bit to get into my career, so I moved out to the West Coast, and I started my career in the biotech industry in technical services. So I was in technical services for 4.5 years, really focusing on troubleshooting analyzers and platforms for our professional laboratorian customers, but also for patients that were using prescription-based testing at home. And after a long time in tech support, I really craved a challenge outside of that. And I found my way to marketing. This was back in the day at Alere. So we did a lot of point of care platforms. And during that time in marketing, there really was no roadmap or easy on-the-job training. And I started looking at getting my MBA. And one of my managers and really mentors at the time talked to me about it. And I said, yeah, eventually I want to do an MBA. I'd like to learn that. And he said, why not now? What's stopping you? And I thought, oh, this is scary. There's student debt and all of these things. But with his guidance, I jumped into it and did a couple-year program. And what that really gave me was things like understanding the difference between revenue and profit margins and things that, seem very simple, but I really didn't have anyone explain to me during my time in the industry. And that allowed me to learn a lot more and kind of propel my career in the marketing arena. So I went over to Quidel, and I started on the international team. At the time, Quidel was a fairly small company, and there was 2 of us for the whole world outside the US. That taught me a lot about almost entrepreneurship. I had to get all of my materials. I had to ship my own stuff to trade shows. I had to figure out how to get stuff done when we were very, very small. And then I transitioned over to the global product management side. And during my time there, I was able to launch COVID assays. Actually, during the pandemic, we had the first antigen test. And so that taught me a lot about product life cycles and new product management, and gave me an opportunity to get more involved in the big picture of the company's direction. So we would have a lot of meetings about where we would want to invest as a company, what's happening with the market overall, and the business side of how we make decisions. And then I moved over to our North American marketing team, working on our infectious disease platforms and then strategic markets where I am today. I've also gained an inside sales team, which is an all new challenge for me. I do not have sales background. So, I think it's important to remember at every stage, there's always something to learn, and a way to grow. So that's my pathway of kind of how I got there. And, hopefully I'll get to talk to you guys a little bit more about it later.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Colleen?
Hi, I'm Colleen Strain. I currently work for Abbott in the R&D Medical Affairs Group, and I'm the scientific lead for the Univance of Healthcare Excellence ORIT program. So my career began in academia. I have a BSc in health studies, and then transferred into a master's program at McMaster University. Similar to Jackie, I actually had plans to go to...
Oh, can you a little closer?
A little closer? Sorry, it's hard to tell.
Thank you.
Okay, I can start again, just so you... So my background, I have a BSc in health studies and a PhD in medical science. I started out in a master's program with plans to go to med school, but ended up working with a brilliant clinical chemist in the field and a leader in the space of ACS. And that's when I really fell in love with laboratory medicine and diagnostics. So my passion area and my kind of area of expertise as it came to my thesis was really based around creating algorithms for decision-making in patients who present to the emergency department with ACS, which set a really nice foundation for what I ultimately end up doing today. But part of the way I got to where I am is by having some very influential mentors throughout my career. I started my master's not entirely sure where I wanted to go. And after a very honest conversation with a mentor of mine, we came up with a plan for what my education would look like, as well as what my career would look like after that. And I attribute a lot of where I am today to that specific conversation and the trust that was, created throughout my grad school. When I finished my PhD, I actually went straight to working for Abbott. Part of that strategic plan that came out of my discussion with my mentor was that my goals and interests and passions would be well suited working in industry. And so I started working at Abbott actually in the marketing group in scientific leadership and education, working with a great team focused on kind of elevating laboratory medicine from a commercial and scientific perspective. About 4 years ago, our team moved into the medical affairs group, and that was just really a strategic decision for how we could best support the goals of our group, which is really focused on that innovation and education. And I mentioned Univance before, and that's one of the ways that we do that by helping out-of-laboratory stakeholders kind of understand the value and the quantification of that value of laboratory medicine. Many of the other things that I focus on relate to serving on task forces and in working groups, as well as a huge amount of education, both internally and externally. And I think that's all for my background so far, but happy to take questions once we get further along.
Yeah, thank you, Colleen. I think two very different but both very interesting backgrounds coming into industry. Phoebe, can you tell us about how you got here?
Yes. Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm Phoebe De La Serna. I'm a customer relationship manager at SYCL Canada. I'm from Montreal, Quebec, and I manage accounts in the Quebec area, Quebec region, and the Atlantic region. First of all, I'm very honored to be here with you all. This is actually my first time attending ADLM. I'm fairly new in the industry. My background, I'm an MLT. I am a medical laboratory technologist. I've worked in a hospital lab for over 8 years. I started working in core lab, and then I switched to blood bank, and I worked there for about 2 years. A big chunk of my experience is in pathology or histology. I did that for 5 years. I also became like a clinical instructor there, where I train new employees, and I worked with students as well. And then I worked in microbiology just before I left the lab to work as a field service engineer. So I used to go out and go back to the hospital. I go in the labs. I used to do troubleshooting. I do repairs on the instruments. I give customer support. And I did that for almost 2 years before I landed my role right now with SYCL. So it's a technical sales role. So it is, it's like a technical or application specialist and a sales specialist. So I still give support to customers out in the field, in the labs. I provide them technical support, technical expertise, and I also provide pricing quotes. I'm involved in RFPs and contracts. So I do all of that while developing and maintaining customer relationship. I'm very new in the industry. It's not even that long yet. But my biggest takeaway so far is that skills can be learned. You have these companies, I'm very thankful because they're able to provide you with the right resources to develop those skills so you can acquire them. Like I left the lab, I was so scared leaving the lab. Like I didn't have engineering background, but I worked as a field service engineer and it actually works. They provide you the resources to do it. Even for me right now, I do sales, but I don't have any sales background, but they will help you. And I'm very thankful for that too. I'm very thankful for that I'm able to have that opportunity to grow. I know it's scary to leave the lab. I've been there. I'm like, I'm comfortable with this. I've been doing the same thing. I know what I'm doing, and leaving the lab was so scary. But I remember what my lab manager told me at that time, that when you're already considering it, just do it. Even though it's scary that you might fail, you're thinking that you might fail, but you don't. I always think of it that, discomfort brings growth, and you will grow and you will learn. And I've lived that way, and I'm very happy where I am. Like, I'm very happy that I left the lab. So yeah, hopefully that would inspire other people who are considering. It is like, do what scares you, because you will learn something and you will not fail. It's either you succeed or you learn, but not fail. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Phoebe. That was super, super inspirational. You know what? As I'm just hearing the three of you so far, I'm really drawing a theme here. And that's that as you look at careers in industry, you don't have to know the job you're going into, right? I mean, Phoebe, you talked so much about how as a field engineer and application specialist, a sales representative in your current role, right? All of those are roles that come with significant training in the corporate world. And I think those are very specific roles. And then now we can also juxtapose that, I think, with some of the roles that Jackie and Colleen came into, where some of them were maybe less defined or didn't come with a clear training plan, but still found a way, right? You find the right mentors, you find the people who understand the role and who bring you along and help you really, really succeed. And I think many of us have had those experiences where we have people around us that are very vested in our success in careers in industry. So Kwok, I'm interested how your background connects with all this coming into a medical affairs role.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. So programs like this and then mentors are what led me to where I am today. So I'm always happy to share my experience. Hopefully it can inspire others. So currently I'm a scientific partner with Roche, US Medical Affairs, and I'll tell you what that means at a later time. But how I started, I'm from Ghana, so hence the thick accent. I moved from Ghana after high school. I did a bachelor's in chemistry. And then right after that, I didn't know what direction to go. So I took a break and then worked. So my first taste of industry, or my first introduction to industry, was working as a quality control tech for Biomiro. So that's why I got introduced to the lab. So I did that for 2 years and I went back to grad school. So that really helped me, because going into grad school, I knew where I was going. I knew that I wanted to be in lab medicine, and that guided the choice of my advisor and my PhD topic. So I did a PhD topic in virology, and actually started coming to AACC right from year one. Got introduced to a lot of the, lab directors, and then started looking at all the different programs, the ABMM programs, the clinical chemistry. So after my PhD, I did a clinical chemistry postdoc at WashU, and that was very instrumental. That took me a step higher in the lab medicine field. And I was fortunate enough, and I mentioned programs like this and mentorship is what led me to where I am, because if you look at clinical chemistry, most of us go on into academia. But I was fortunate enough with mentors and programs like this, was able to be connected with Roche. So I joined Roche right out of fellowship, which came with its own challenges, but then also opportunities. I say challenges because most people will transition from an academic role into industry, and then they learn a lot of the day-to-day practical things in the academic role, and then they transition into industry. I did not have that, so I needed to learn everything on the job. But what was remarkable for me at Roche was I had mentors there that had done that transition, so I didn't have to do it to be able to perform my duties. So that was very instrumental. So back to what do I do at Roche? So I'm with the Roche Medical Affairs, and I cover the core lab infectious disease serology assays. And basically what that means as a scientific partner is I oversee the strategy of all these assays. And how I describe it to people is usually research and development will develop the assay, and then clinical development will take it through the FDA, and their jobs are done, and we take over the assay. So we perform our duties in mainly three ways. We educate stakeholders both internally and then externally. we engage with stakeholders the same way, both internally and externally, to gather insights just to better the assays and also improve on the assay's performance in the real world. And then we generate evidence to support the clinical utility of all the assays that we have on the market. So I summarize it to say it's just like a lab director, but then like assistant lab director, where you're not directly dealing with the patient, but you're dealing with the entities that deal with the patient. So so far it's been very fulfilling. I still learn a lot, and I keep learning, and happy to talk more about the roles maybe later.
Yeah, thank you, Kwaku. And interesting also that you mentioned mentors as the others have, and they're very influential. But you also mentioned lab directors, and we have a former lab director sitting right next to me here. George?
My name is George Worsham. I'm the Global Product Manager for Informatics at Quidel Ortho. So I've been in the lab world for almost 30 years now, about half of that in the clinical laboratory and about half of it in industry. I have a bachelor's degree in biology and clinical laboratory science. I live here in Chicago. My first job was actually at Michael Reese Hospital, which is now a parking lot just south of here. And it was a great experience because at that time in the industry, there was a lot of older technologists still in the lab, and most of them had been grandfathered in. So I had an actual degree. So when I started my career in the laboratory, I got a lot of opportunities. I got every instrument we brought in. I got to go for training for it. I was having to do the review of technologists that had been working in the lab for 40 years. So it was a lot of experience, and I got elevated pretty quickly at that hospital. So it was a great opportunity. But also at that time, it was like a tough financial market here in Chicago. There was a lot of consolidation of the hospitals. Financially, Michael Reese used to be one of the premier hospitals in Chicago. It has a very storied history, especially in the lab industry. And financially, they were doing very poor. They had gone through 4 owners in 10 years, one of them being Columbia, which really got in trouble with Medicare fraud. And it really hurt them. So I was always scared they were going to close and I'd be out of a job. So after about 5 years, I decided I wanted to make a transition. And I transitioned to Edward Hospital, which is out in the southwest suburbs here. And there I started as a lead technologist because I did have all that experience from my first job in the laboratory. I quickly elevated there also into a supervisor role and then into a management role. I think at this point in time in my career, I think I've supervised or managed pretty much every area of the lab, from blood bank through histology, pathology, all the clinical departments. I did also, while there, I did get an MBA because I did want to stay in the lab at that time. I loved it. And I really wanted to move up into a director role. And what I saw, though, was the roles were very limited. And once you got up into a certain area, there wasn't a lot of other places to go. And so you weren't really considered for upper-level leadership or management positions outside the lab. And so it was challenging. I felt stuck. So, so I started to look at other things. What are my other options outside of it? The other thing is I thought I had already accomplished a lot in the 2 hospitals I had worked at and had done a great job. So I kind of wanted to take all my knowledge and be able to, impart that on other laboratories and help them make improvements and grow and expand from the way we had. So when I looked at industry, we actually had some people coming into our lab because we were looking at automation and new chemistry implementation, doing consulting type roles. And that really appealed to me. So that was actually my first job in industry, was doing consulting. I started at Siemens doing that role. I was actually interviewed by Dade and then hired by Siemens, which is interesting. And I think it's important to know that because that's one of the things I quickly learned in industry is change happens at a much faster pace than in the lab. I could say the change in 15 years in the lab was pretty limited. Just maybe some advancements in the informatics and the computers, but other than that, really there was very little change. But industry is much faster paced. when I did consulting, I did both pre-sale type consulting roles, but most of my time I was doing what they called optimization there. So that was going in and helping customers that were struggling, either with their laboratory or their workflows or even our instrumentation. And I found that job really rewarding. It gave me the opportunity to see all these different hospitals and labs. My time at Siemens, I was probably in over 1,000 labs in this country and even abroad, which was another great opportunity to be able to go into other countries, see other cultures, see how their laboratories operate. And it was really exciting to be able to do that. And you learn so much. You take in all this information, you really start to learn what works, what doesn't work, what can be successful. And at my time at Siemens, my role continued to evolve, and I ended up in a strategic marketing role, developing programs and tools to help laboratories become more efficient, also to address some of the current issues at that time. At that time, PAMA had just come into play, so we were doing a lot of things with that and helping laboratories address the decreased reimbursement from that. And then I joined actually at that time it was Ortho, about 5 years ago. And again, I moved back into a consulting role. I had really missed that, and I enjoyed it, so that's really where I wanted to go. I did that at Ortho for about 2 years, almost all pre-sale type of work with customers. But again, I find it very rewarding going into labs, helping them find areas where they can improve. And because it's not always about trying to sell something. I always felt like if I give value, then the sales will come. I don't have to sell a product. About 3 years ago, I moved into a product marketing role. I decided to make that transition because the travel got a bit much. As I got older, it gets harder and harder to do the travel. I'd been basically on the road for almost 10, 12 years. The last year I was doing consulting. I did the job up till November. So in 11 months, I spent 200 nights in hotels. It becomes a lot, and it wears on you. So I moved to this product marketing role because it is less travel. I still get to travel, which is still exciting because if you don't understand your market, you're not going to be able to deliver products that meet your market needs. And in a global role, I have to understand other markets beyond the U.S. I've been in informatics, and actually that was it seems like a weird jump from consulting to informatics, and informatics tends to be a younger person's space. But actually, the informatics in lab today is nothing more than automating workflows. And so my background in workflow really transitioned well into that. Like with product marketing, I'm developing the strategy and the products for like next generation type of informatics that will go into laboratories. So again, I find that rewarding because these tools will be used, throughout labs across the whole world. So that's exciting to me to be able to be part of that and be able to do that. So I still miss the lab a lot of times. I mean, I enjoy the lab. I still enjoy a lot about it. I try to stay involved with local organizations because that helps me keep a touch point with the lab and what's going on even in my local community and area. But I have never really regretted leaving the lab because it's given me a lot of opportunities to impart, my knowledge, my experience on just a large number of laboratories across the globe. And it's given me the opportunity to experience a lot of different cultures, see a lot of different things, and it's been a wonderful experience so far.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, George. So we've heard about a number of different entry points into industry, right? Everything from technical support to education to field engineering, medical affairs and consulting, all different entry points. And then you notice several of the speakers landed even in very different places. Since we're doing pretty well on time, maybe I'll share with you a couple of tidbits from my own personal experience. I took a very roundabout path to get into the lab industry. I started my career after undergrad in a laboratory, but it was a Forest Service laboratory, so a biological science lab, and then went and got my MBA. And after my MBA, got away from the lab and moved into supply chain business at Johnson & Johnson. And about 6 years into that, I really wanted to move towards marketing. And so I did a lot of networking. And that's a theme I want to share with you. A lot of networking, a lot of knocking on doors. And one of the things they teach you when you get an MBA is how to network. And there's really two things you need to know. 2 words. Number one is informational interview. You say, George, I'd really like to do an informational interview to learn all about your job and your department, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is this question that you have to get really, really good at is, who else should I speak with? Right? So you have a great conversation with George, and you say, you know, who else should I speak with? And George will give you 2 more people, and those 2 people will give you 2 other people, and pretty soon, we all know how the math goes, you'll have 2,064 connections, right? So, you know, I took that path and I knocked on a lot of doors coming from supply chain. I happened to be in a role where I was doing project management for a project of moving orthoclinical diagnostics as distribution into a warehouse in Memphis. So I was doing a lot of work with warehousing and conveyor belts and this and that. And as part of my networking, one of the discussions, they said, you know, we're looking for a product manager for lab automation. I said, what's lab automation? They said, you know, the track systems, the conveyors that move tubes between instruments in a lab. And I said, oh, I know all about conveyors because I'd worked in warehouses. And that was the connection. Like that little tidbit, you know, along with, I think, some good interview practice, you know, you always look for one spark, one connection. And that led to being hired in as a product manager for lab automation. And from there, about 8 different jobs that brought me to my role today. So I just share that with you because we're going to have opportunity for networking later. And I want to make sure that you take full advantage of that and start asking them, you know, all about their roles in more detail and who else to speak with. So with that, why don't I take a pivot in our conversation here today, and let's open up the floor to questions because I've got a few more things I'd love to ask them, but I'd love to hear first from the audience what else you would like to hear about as you think about making the moves into industry. So I'll walk around with the microphone. If you could just raise your hand if you have a question. Who wants to be first? We have Trish from Abbott. Trish, by the way, you may or may not know, is one of the leaders in our industry from the industry side. She's one of the leaders at IFCC and has been a leader for many years on the corporate advisory board with ADLM.
Thank you. I find this, I love this session every year. I think it gives everyone a real diverse perspective of the types of diversity that happens in companies. I think sometimes it's hard for people to put, you know, and I can speak to every day not being the same day of anyone's, you know, it's very complex. But just because so many of you work in so many different areas, maybe if you could do a day in the life of what it is, you know, in each of your sort of like maybe highs and lows, or a day in the life of in each of your roles.
Who wants to start?
I can start. Yeah, so every day is different for me, but actually the day-to-day is influenced by how we start the year. So with Roche Medical Affairs, what we do is we start the year with, we end the year with medical planning for the next year. So we plan out the whole year, and everybody, so we are divided in terms of disease areas. So I cover infectious diseases. So with the assays that I cover and the disease area that I cover, I plan out for the year, what are the needs? So we do like a situational analysis where we're looking at what are the needs, what are the gaps in terms of what I mentioned, education, in terms of engagement, in terms of evidence planning, and we lay it out. So then we put what we call tactics, which is things that will help fill those gaps in between. So let's say AACC is a huge conference for all of us. We know there's like an education need for lab directors on one assay or disease area. So we start planning it out. Who's the best speaker? What topic do they have to talk? So my day-to-day revolves around that, talking to different individuals about, are you interested in speaking? So it involves a lot of meetings, essentially. So that's one aspect of it. The other part is we work closely with both R&D and then clinical development. So all the assays that are going into registration, so basically FDA registration, because Roche is unique in the sense that our global, so we are like a global company, and we sit in Europe, but then all the assets also get registered in the US. So medical affairs in the US kind of give the US perspective. So make sure that the assay that is being designed in Europe and coming fits the US market. And so I sit in all those meetings as well. So I cover infectious diseases, so I cover all the infectious disease assay registration. So that's one aspect of it too. So that also involves meetings. We also do ad boards. So it could be getting insights on a particular pipeline assay. So getting experts together to get their take and also insights on what needs to be done for this particular disease area for this. So essentially, it's a lot of meetings, which involves a lot of planning because your day, you could be pulled in so many directions, and without planning, it could be jumbled all up together. So one intangible or one technique that I would say you would need to succeed in industry is just being a good planner, because you're not focusing on one thing. You're focusing on two different directions, and it takes planning to be able to keep yourself sane and also to perform at a higher level. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that's exactly what it is. It's a lot of meetings. I spend most of my day in meetings. And, I think that got worse coming out of COVID because everybody got used to the idea of the Zoom meetings and the WebEx meetings. I would say our company, a large percentage of the people do work remotely. So you're at home and you got to really structure your day to be able to work around those meetings, to be able to still accomplish the things you need to accomplish. So a lot of my meetings are strategic in the direction on the way the product is going. Mine is more about the development part of the marketing, and it's not so much about the downstream selling of the product. So I'm on a lot of meetings with our R&D teams and then also with regulatory and everybody else that needs to get involved with getting a product to market. So it's constant meetings all day long most of the time, and then you have very little windows of time that you have to try to get your actual work done in. So it's definitely a challenge often balancing that, and working remote, I think, presents a lot of different challenges when you work in the lab. In the lab, you're doing 8 hours a day. I think a lot of people in the lab are used to working overtime and extra shifts and that, because that's just the normal state these days. But when you're working remote, I think the challenge is cutting it off at 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours and on the weekends, because it's constant and you feel like you're always falling behind. So it's really hard to keep up with everything all the time. So it's hard to have that separation, but I think it just comes down to how you organize yourself, as Cote.
I'm happy to go next. Not unlike my colleagues, my day-to-day varies a great deal. But currently, and given the timing, I can't remember the exact date, it's the 28th of July, given that the program, the Unimon's Healthcare Excellence Award Program, has an important date of August 1st coming, where applications can be submitted. And given that this program really focuses on quantifying the value of laboratory medicine, a great deal of my time is spent in meetings, but focusing on helping people to quantify their value to those out-of-laboratory stakeholders. We as laboratorians have a lot of data, we love a lot of data, but sometimes helping that data speak to people who don't necessarily know the ins and outs of our profession is not something that we've been typically trained to do or good at. But as we think about laboratory medicine as a profession, we need to make sure that others can see that value, and sometimes that value needs to be shown in a different way. And so my role, I have the pleasure really of working with people like you and really starting to quantify that value so it can be shared on a larger scale and hopefully replicated in a way that people can see that value on a larger scale as this profession becomes kind of more outward facing.
So George is kind of on the flip side of marketing. Working more upstream, and in my current role, my team really works more downstream and interacts with people like George, to connect the dots on introducing new products. But I would say, and my current role is more about segments and channels than actual products, we're really the team that brings those together and says, okay, of all of these different products and portfolios and all of our value propositions and messages, how do we go and look at health systems and IDNs, and how do we deliver that message to them, and how do we create value within their organization for what their specific goals are? So my team, we have marketing managers on the team that are focused on health system IDNs, urgent care, government, and then also people focused on distribution. So, of the large distributors around, the US that most healthcare customers use, we have specific programs with them. A lot of our products are sold through them. So we need strategies that are specific to each of those. And then other than the customers themselves, I would say in this role, like a lot of my friends, when they say you're in marketing, they're like, oh, you're like an ad agency, right? And I'm like, no, I'm actually very bad at that. We work with our marketing communications team for what we want the message to be in ads, and they're really doing a lot of that creative. I would say where more of our attention is focused is the field sales team. They are one of our number one customers because they are the ones out there selling and going in person. So we do a lot of creation of tools to help them better understand and communicate what our product provides and the value that it provides to our customers. So most of our activities, yes, we have to deal with budgets. Yes, we do trade shows. We have to do marketing plans, and at the beginning of the year, create those strategies and those tactics. But really, at the end of the day, it's about how do we deliver value to our customers and how do we help our field sales team understand how to do that.
That's great. And Phoebe?
Yes. For me, it varies day to day. My role is very customer focused. So it really depends on what you have. If you have any pending issues with the customers, you're there to support them, and you start your day organizing yourself and which one you're going to tackle first. As a technical specialist on my other hat, it's technical specialist where we help, like I'm in a coagulation business. I help customers doing lot conversions, setting up their methodologies. Like I'm there to help the customer on the application side of the instrument. So I'm really there to support them. And then on the sales side, it's more on, it's not like a car salesman. You're like selling just to sell. It's basically giving information to the lab, to the management, just, providing them the resources that I have, giving them the information for them to decide on how they're going to run their lab. So I think it's only a plus when you're able to sell it, but it's really just giving them the information that they need to properly diagnose patients. In the end, it's really not just, for me, it's customer focused, but I know in the lab it's really patient focused. It is to give the right diagnosis for the patients in the end. So also I do trade shows as well. Like I just recently did LabCon back in Canada. It was really great. And this is my second one here in the US, and I'm very excited. There's a lot of new innovations, and I'm glad that I'm on that side where you're able to provide more, better ways to work with the workflow in the lab. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Phoebe. So we have a question in the back here. Let me take a little jog over.
So I have managed to get out of the several years as a technologist, and now I'm the scope of my role is a bit technical supervisor, but as well as managing the operations of our small clinical laboratory. I'm really enjoying the operations portion of it and looking forward to stepping away from the wet bench even more. But I've been tossing around the idea of getting an MBA, and I don't know whether the personal investment, has a good return for it. Where can I get commentary? Maybe George, you might have a good perspective on this. Where does it really fit in science, whether it's in industry or clinical work?
Yeah, it's a great question, I think, for George and Jackie both with MBAs, right?
Yeah, I would say I thought long about what I wanted to do. At the time, I was originally looking at doing some type of master's program in clinical laboratory science. But at the same time, I was feeling like stuck kind of where I was at. So that's where I decided to do MBA, because I thought it would give me a broader view of things, give me more on the financial side. That would give me maybe some more opportunities, maybe outside the lab or in industry. And I really think that's what it did do. And as I moved, once I got my MBA, even in the lab, it made me much easier to have discussions with the higher ups in the lab or outside the lab when it came to financial decisions. But it also enabled me, as I worked with vendors and trying to negotiate, it gives you a lot more information and value. I would say once I left the lab, it was tremendously valuable to me because it gave me the opportunity to really put together a lot of pieces, which are really important and critical. You can't just focus on the two moves from point A to point B. You have to understand how that impacts everything from the labor to the supplies to the overall operations of the hospital. And those all have impact. And I think that MBA helped me understand a lot of that and tie it all to those financials, because in the end, when you start getting into conversations at the C-suite level or even at, even at some of the other upper levels, it all comes down to the financials. And if you can't have that conversation and have it intelligently, it's really hard to get there. So I think that's been the value for me.
And I would say the combination of biology or science, lab tech background with business is a perfect combination in this industry. What the MBA gives you is it gives you the opportunity to understand at a high level all the big picture pieces and parts of the business, where the science helps you to understand the products that you're actually working with. And, when I did my MBA, there was so many interesting classes and so many aha moments. And can I tell you that I remember 100% of everything I learned? No. But what it did do was give me exposure to all the different parts of the business that I would need. So if you want to move up in industry through the organization, as you get higher and higher, the expectation is that you have a big picture view of the business and how it works. The second thing I would say is, it was mentioned earlier, but the networking is huge. I would say probably 90% of my classmates in my MBA were doing it to change careers. And they were broadly successful in doing so, and it gave them an opportunity and a leg up to do that. We still have a Facebook group chat 6 years later for my class, and we still, mention career opportunities through there and get referrals from each other. But I think that's the value is an MBA is not a highly specialized degree. It's a broad knowledge base. And I think the earlier that you do it in your career, I think, at least what I experienced, the better, because you kind of get that leg up and jump early on where you can put things into practice in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think, your point on being a career changer. So I was a career changer. I mentioned I worked in the lab. I was making $9.82 an hour, which was not paying a whole lot of bills at the time. And certainly getting the MBA provided a multiple of that figure, within 2 years. The other thing I would add is I think on the career switching side, you want to go into it thinking about, do you want the MBA to enhance the career path you're currently on, or do you really want to do something different? It can still tie, right, to the science and to the lab, but do you want to fundamentally be in a different role? And I think that's really important to think about, because your question was also about whether the investment is worthwhile. And it's a very, very large financial investment. I think in my experience, and maybe yours too, Jackie and George, for those of us who did a significant switch, in our career, right, it was like a leapfrog, right? And then the financial return was there. I think I also see, because I do a lot of recruiting, I see candidates who sort of did it on in a way that was sort of just like they continued with their career. And by the way, they also got an MBA and they kind of continued with their career. They didn't see much of a bump. And I think that's really important to keep in mind because you're sort of like, yeah, I'm still here in the same career. By the way, I also have an MBA, but I'm still in the same career. Very different than I did this, then I got an MBA, now I'm going to do this other thing.
So I will say, Nadav, I switched over to marketing without it and then did it after, and I do feel like it made a huge difference for me. But again, I did it pretty early in my career where I didn't have to spend 10 to 15 years with on-the-job learning to understand some concepts. So when you get it early on and you get that boost right away, that's where you'll see the most progression. There's people who don't do their MBA and they work in the workforce for 20 years, and I think there's a diminishing return later on.
That's a really, really good point. It's a really good point, Jackie. Thank you. Okay, we have a question over here.
Fantastic panel. Thank you so much for your insights. So I'm a clinical chemistry fellow, second year at University of Minnesota. And so I'm planning and transitioning to, looking for a job next year. And so for the clinical chemistry background, what are the, with our background and training, what are the skills that I could use to transition to industry? Because mostly we're very exposed to academia, or medical directors. But what else? Or how can we use our skills for that? And then I have another question for marketing and sales. I know Jacqueline talked a lot about it, but how do I learn that not being in sales? So when I come into the job market, I don't know. How do you get to that point, or it's just experience on the job? I don't know. Thank you.
Two good questions. Please jump in.
I think I'll take that. That's a great question. I had the same questions when, actually, I'll tell you a backstory. When I saw the Roche job posted at first, I did not apply. Even though my then director sent it to me and said, Kwaku, you should apply to this. I was like, I don't know what they're talking about in the job description. It doesn't fit any of my qualifications. But I think and that's where networking and having someone to really explain what they do in industry to you is important. Every skill that you're learning as a clinical chemist or you're learning to be a lab director applies in industry, in medical affairs. So let's take, for example, as a lab director, you're interacting with different stakeholders, right? So let's say if you cover core lab, you be dealing with different physicians, result interpretation and things like that. You're doing the same thing as a medical affairs person. Instead of dealing with physicians, you'll be dealing with more of the marketing colleagues, asking you questions, or even sometimes, in Roche, how we've structured is we have a field role and then a strategic role. So the field roles, you can call them, they are disease agnostic, so they go out and then talk to everybody about anything, but then they have a region that they cover, right? And then they come back with those insights, with those questions. And then the strategic roles are more disease specific. So for instance, I cover infectious diseases. So all the field colleagues, if they have in-depth ID questions, I'm the one that they come to, and then we sit down and come up with a strategy together. If they need education materials to go and educate, I'm the one that they come to. And then, so everything that you're doing, so that comes to the teaching part, right? So as a lab director, you'll be teaching. We do the same thing. You teach both internally and then externally. So you're teaching salespeople when there's a new assay, what is the scientific, nuances in this assay. You're the one teaching them, like the marketing folks as well. So, and then engagement, you go out there and then, conferences, talk to people, present to your data. So we actually have an avenue where we could do research as well. So in Roche, we have an internal lab. We call it the applications lab, where you could actually do research if you wanted to, but mostly we collaborate with lab directors to do research. So every skill that you're doing, that you're learning, translates. And then I know most clinical chemists don't like this part. With the management, it's a huge portion. Like I mentioned, medical planning. So with medical planning, at the beginning of every year, your division will assign you, this is your budget. So you have to go in and say, okay, well, I need to prioritize this assay or this disease area over that, and then assign this sum of money to it in terms of the tactics that I want to do. So to cut it short, everything that you learn to be a lab director applies in industry. You just have to apply differently slightly, right? So, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I have not a lab director role or background, but a scientific background. And so many of the kind of softer skills that you develop throughout academia and leadership in that area apply significantly across different roles. I've been on the commercial marketing side. I'm now on medical affairs, and the analytical and the critical thinking that you need to ask why this and not that, and how can we see this bigger picture and how does it fit, can make all the difference in the world when it comes to being successful. And even basic things like being organized can keep you going. I forget who mentioned it, but how fast-paced industry really is. Change happens so quickly, and if you can, keep that organization and keep up with those types of things, that can even just be the difference between success and failure. And so those softer skills I find are just as important as some of the analytical and academic skills that you garner from an academic side as well.
I totally agree with those soft skills. I think my opinion is just as important as hard skills is those type of skills and your attitude. I think being humble and bold, but being vulnerable and being willing to go the extra mile is a huge thing. But I love your question because coming out of undergrad with biology, I moved out to San Diego, 2009. It was a terrible economy. I had no job. I just moved out. I was like, I want to live in the sunshine. And I ended up in biotech. And I started in tech support. And the people who do tech support their whole careers are heroes because I could not. It was a really good learning experience. And I was in it for about 4.5 years. I would say about 2 years in, I really wanted not to be in technical support anymore because it's a hard job. You're dealing with complaints all the time. There's not a lot of different projects or areas to move into. And so I tried to take on as many extra projects as I could. But one of the ways that I moved into marketing was I tried to do as many cross-functional projects as I could. And I volunteered for a lot of them because what that did was, I had the VP of marketing wanted to come listen to calls for a day. So I was the first person to volunteer. We had a recall of a product with a cross-functional team, with the product manager and all different entities volunteered right away. What that allowed me to do over time was build credibility with these other leaders in the organization that I knew I wanted to go to. And I applied to 2 marketing roles early on that I didn't get. But when it came to the third marketing role, and it was kind of an entry-level marketing role, it ended up being the hiring manager was that VP of marketing. And she was like, hey, I've seen what you can do. I've seen your attitude. I know that you go after and you get things done. And I'm ready to give you this chance. And so I knew that if I left at 2 years and I tried to get another job, I would be qualified for tech support. And I'd be hired for tech support. And so I didn't want to lose all that equity in what people saw I could do at the company. And so I kept building on that until I was given a chance. And so that would be kind of my advice. Like, if you move into industry, if sales or marketing is something you want to do, you don't have to move straight into it. You can move into something in industry and then build that bridge, working with different departments and stakeholders, and eventually you're going to get to where you want to be.
Thank you. Really, really great answers. Let me come over here.
I can't help myself. I have to make a comment. So I'm Laura from Roche. I work with Coaco in medical affairs. So to add to your question, I was a lab director for 8 years before coming to Roche. So I think one of the things that I always tell people when we're having the informational interviews is to, like, when you come to industry, you have to check your ego in the door, like as soon as you get your email, because you will be surrounded by a lot of very smart people in a lot of different disciplines, and you're no longer the key opinion leader that you were when you had the vendors come to your lab. So I think that's the key. If that's not in your idea of what the job and industry is, then don't come, right? Because it's going to be a shock and you're going to be like regretting it. So I think for me, one of the most humbling things were really a lot of very, very smart and motivated people that will teach you and they will take you through an open-minded building your brand. You're talking about building your brand in the company, and then everything is cross-functional. So if you're not collaborative, if you don't enjoy collaborative work, this is not for you. So those are my two key things that I say when I give my informationals. So.
No, really super additions. Next question. I think we have time for one or two more, since we're up here, and then I'll come back.
Just a disclaimer, I'm with Siemens as well in medical affairs. Yeah, so we sit next to each other as well. So also clinical chemist by training. So the panel here, you all talked about your day jobs. It'll be interesting to see how medical affairs interact to marketing, like how the interactions cross-functionally happen. Not just what you do, Kwaku or Jacqueline or George, but how the different functions as well in industry, like they interact with each other.
Yeah, I can start. So with medical affairs and other functions, so I mentioned one, like a project like registering FDA-approved assays, right? So that needs expertise from different areas. So we will have marketing, which will be the product manager sitting on that team. Clinical development, so their expertise is in running the clinical trials and then, identifying sites and things like that, like the technicalities. And then we sit on it as well to bring, the need or the clinical need from the US perspective on those roles. So that's one avenue that we cross-talk. I also mentioned planning. So for instance, the business side of things cannot be prioritizing infectious diseases, and then medical is prioritizing cardiometabolism. So we have to be on the same page at the beginning of the year. So that also entails a lot of crosstalk. And one of our major stakeholders as medical affairs is the internal organization. So recently I just concluded a training session where marketing and medical affairs teamed up together to train the sales people out there to go out and then, the nuances of the assays and things like that. So there's so many, I believe everything that we touch is cross-functional because we are strategic pillars of the same company. And at the end, our service is to the patients. And I think we do it in different ways, but it has to be collective. So I think I would say every project comes with some sort of collaboration.
Yeah, everything that we work on, it has to be collaborative. I'd say my role is interesting because it's informatics, and that spans all the different business units. So a lot of us are segmented by our business unit, clinical chemistry, coag, TM, but the informatics has to span all of it. So I'm interacting with people from our chemistry side, our blood bank side, our point of care side constantly, and then even within the project, and I'm interacting with our research and development group to make sure that we can develop the products that we need to deliver to the market, and getting the prioritizations set to where they need to be. But then also working with different groups like legal, regulatory, working with the rest of the marketing teams to make sure that once we do develop a product that we can market it and sell it. So it's a constant. That's what I do all day. I'm working with different people. I rarely work with anybody that's directly in the same role as me. It's more people outside my role.
I totally agree with the collaborative work. I am customer facing. I do work a lot with the customers, but you do work with different departments. Like, because I am also sales, we work with medical affairs, we work with legal for the contracts, you work with the contract specialist, We work with marketing, how to position ourselves and how to get the information out there that we got from medical affairs. And you also work with technical support or hotline and understand what's going on. It's not like you're only alone, you're not just doing things, you manage your own time, but you're not doing things alone. You get resources from different departments in order to fully support the customer.
Thank you. And I think we have one more question back here, and then we're going to open it up for networking, because that's important too.
How would you recommend an undergrad get their foot in the door with industry before grad school?
Did you guys hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's an interesting question. I mean, I went from grad school directly into industry. I like that someone so early on in their career kind of knows what they want to do. And I think there's two key things that have been said a couple times up here. And one is to find a good mentor. I've been really fortunate throughout my career in undergrad, grad school, and now even in industry to have mentors, teachers, friends who can provide guidance, insights, share personal stories and connections who can really help you. It's hard to know what you want if you don't have a little bit of direction. So leaning on those people can be hugely beneficial. I also did a great deal of informational interviews as I was nearing the end of grad school and had no job. And that also proved to be a really beneficial experience for me. It helped me understand the industry, what the industry actually was when I said industry, and to know what kind of jobs were out there, because to Kwaiku's commentary, you see a job description and maybe you don't think that's something you want to do or you don't fully understand it. So sometimes getting that kind of backhand or information straight from the source can open your eyes to something you didn't know already existed. So those would be my big key things to do now.
I would say one of the things is to get your foot in the door is look for opportunities that are related to what you're studying first, if that's possible. The other thing is you are at a wonderful conference for this. Try to talk to all the people in industry that you can, and people really appreciate initiative. And if you're talking to them and saying, hey, I want to talk to someone who does this in the industry, I'm really interested in a career in doing that, I think you'll find that a lot of people are willing to talk to you and or even schedule time to stay in touch and be a mentor. The other thing is, I know our company typically does in certain departments, and many industry companies have things like summer internships. And our company in the past has had them and has often hired on some of those people later on. So I think that's a really good opportunity. But if you're straightforward and you talk to people and say, hey, I'm really interested in the future about your company, would you be willing to talk to me? I think you'll find that a lot of people would be.
And I would just add one other element. If the direction you want to go is commercial and particularly sales, many companies in our industry have sales associate programs where they'll bring on folks with an undergraduate degree but not a graduate degree necessarily as sort of junior salespeople. And that's a really, really good way to get your foot in the door if that's the particular direction that you're interested in. So there have been really, oh yeah, Kwaku, please, one more.
Yeah, those are all really good. One other option that is usually the easiest for me was, so a lot of the lab directors work with the different companies on research, right? And if they're working on, for instance, a project with Roche, that's a way to actually work on that project and interact with Roche folks. So I think for me, that was the easiest, because internships and things like that, they can be very competitive, but that would be the easiest, where you stay where you are, but still get the interaction with industry, so.
So at this point, just looking at the time, we've got about 11 minutes left till we all turn into pumpkins here. So I want to really thank the panel for their grace, their thoughtfulness, and their very exceptional answers. I think they've done a fantastic job. You wouldn't know it, but many of them are first-time panelists. So really, really impressed with your work today. And thank you to the audience. Some really good, deep, insightful questions. And at this point, I might just invite the panel to come down and network so you can all practice your networking skills and speak with us directly. Thank you so much.